The radio waves crackled with urgency that June morning in 1944. Static filled the signal bridge as coded messages transformed into orders that would reshape naval history. Deep in the Marshall Islands at Majuro Atoll, Task Force 58 received the directive that would unleash the largest naval aviation force ever assembled. Operation Forager was beginning. The Marianas awaited. Japanese positions on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam would face unprecedented aerial assault. What no one aboard those ships could foresee was the catastrophic battle that would follow. A single engagement that would obliterate Japanese carrier aviation forever. Vice Admiral Mark Andrew Mitchell stood motionless as he absorbed the magnitude of his command. Through his binoculars stretched an armada that defied comprehension. 15 massive fleet carriers cut through Pacific swells. 7 battleships maintained formation alongside 21 cruisers. 69 destroyers provided escort in a display of American industrial might that would have seemed impossible just 3 years earlier. The mathematics were staggering. This concentration of naval power represented everything American shipyards could produce, everything American training programs could staff, everything American strategy demanded for victory in the Pacific. Modern warfare had evolved beyond recognition since Pearl Harbor. Aircraft carriers were no longer experimental platforms. They had become the decisive weapons that determined naval supremacy. Control the aircraft, and you controlled the skies. Control the skies, and the seas belonged to you. Control the seas, and you could project American power across the vast Pacific distances that had once seemed insurmountable. The Essex-class carriers embodied this strategic revolution. Each massive ship displaced over 27,000 tons of seawater when fully loaded. Their dimensions told the story of American industrial ambition. 872 feet of flight deck stretched from bow to stern. 93 feet of beam provided stability in heavy seas. These were not merely ships. They were floating cities designed for one purpose. 25 knots carried Task Force 58 toward destiny. The carrier formations spread across 40 miles of ocean presented a spectacle that would have been unimaginable to naval strategists of an earlier era. Each Essex-class vessel housed over 3,400 men and 90 aircraft in a complex dance of logistics and firepower. Mitchell's command included the most famous names in American naval history. USS Essex led her class into combat. USS Yorktown carried the legacy of earlier battles. USS Hornet flew the same name that had launched Doolittle's raiders. USS Bunker Hill, USS Wasp, USS Lexington, and USS Enterprise completed the heavy carrier force. 8 Independence-class light carriers supplemented the striking power. USS Below Wood, USS Bataan, USS Monterey, USS Cabot, USS San Jacinto, USS Princeton, USS Langley, and USS Copens added their air groups to the massive formation. The aircraft complement represented American aviation at its peak. Each Essex-class carrier operated 4 distinct squadrons in perfect coordination. 36 F-6F Hellcat fighters provided air superiority. 36 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers delivered precision strikes. 18 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers completed the offensive package. 900 aircraft operating from mobile platforms that could position themselves anywhere across the Pacific theater. Every technical specification told the story of American industrial supremacy. 4 elevators per carrier could cycle aircraft between hangar and flight deck in 45 seconds. Flight deck catapults launched aircraft every 30 seconds during maximum operations. The tempo of operations would overwhelm any opponent. Captain Arleigh Burke served as Mitchell's chief of staff. A Harvard Law School graduate who had transformed himself into a naval strategist of unprecedented skill. Burke understood that modern carrier warfare had become a precise science of time and space calculations. Launch cycles determined striking power. Recovery windows limited operational flexibility. Fuel consumption rates governed tactical options. Ammunition expenditure controlled sustained operations. Victory or defeat often hinged on minutes in launch timing. Nautical miles in positioning could determine the outcome of engagements involving hundreds of aircraft and thousands of lives. Burke had calculated these variables with characteristic precision. The American advantage was overwhelming in every category that mattered. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles to the west, a different naval force prepared for what its commanders knew would be a decisive confrontation. Aboard the Japanese carrier Taiho, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa reviewed operational orders for what the Imperial Navy designated Operation A-Go. His flagship represented the newest and most advanced carrier in Japanese service. Taiho displaced 29,300 tons and carried 75 aircraft. Her armored flight deck was unique among Japanese carriers. Designed to withstand direct hits from 500-pound bombs, she embodied Japanese hopes for technological superiority over American numerical advantage. 9 carriers with 430 aircraft constituted Japan's last concentrated striking force. The first mobile fleet included veteran carriers that had participated in Pearl Harbor. Shokaku and Zuikaku bore the scars of earlier battles. Fleet carriers Junyo and Hiyo provided additional striking power. Light carriers Ryujo, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho completed the formation. On paper, the force appeared formidable. The reality concealed fatal weaknesses that would prove decisive. Pilot quality had deteriorated catastrophically since the war's beginning. Pearl Harbor veterans had averaged 700 hours of flight time before entering combat. The aviators aboard Ozawa's carriers averaged fewer than 275 hours. Many possessed as little as 100 hours total flight experience. Some had never landed on a carrier at night. Others had never fired their guns in anger. The mathematics of attrition had systematically destroyed Japanese naval aviation. Over 400 experienced pilots had died at Midway. Another 250 fell during Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz. Hundreds more perished during the grinding Solomon Islands campaign. Each loss represented years of training that could not be replaced. Experienced instructors had been recalled to combat units. Advanced training programs had been abbreviated to meet urgent personnel needs. American forces organized into 4 task groups as they approached the Marianas on June 11th. Task Group 58-1 operated under Rear Admiral Joseph Jocko Clark. His carriers included Hornet, Yorktown, Belleau Wood, and Baton. Task Group 58.2 followed Rear Admiral Alfred Montgomery with Bunker Hill, Wasp, Monterey, and Cabot. Task Group 58.3 sailed under Rear Admiral John Reeves with Flagship Enterprise, Lexington, San Jacinto, and Princeton. Task Group 58.4 operated under Rear Admiral William Harrell with Essex, Langley, and Copens. At 1300 hours on June 11th, the first Essex-class fighter sweep launched against Japanese airfields throughout the Marianas. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer commanded VF-15 from USS Essex. He led 32 Hellcats toward Japanese positions on Guam's Orote airfield. The mission would demonstrate American technological and tactical superiority in devastating fashion. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat embodied everything the Essex-class carriers represented. Industrial mass production had created a fighter aircraft that combined reliability, firepower, and performance in unprecedented fashion. A 2,000-horsepower Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine provided power that Japanese aircraft could not match. Maximum speed reached 380 miles per hour. Climb to 20,000 feet required only 7 minutes. Radar operators tracked the fighter sweep from combat information centers aboard the carriers. Radar operator First Class James Chen operated the SK Air Search Radar aboard USS Essex. The system detected aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles and altitudes up to 30,000 feet. Operators swept the antenna through calculated arcs. They analyzed return signals for range and bearing information. The data flowed to fighter direction officers who controlled defensive and offensive operations. Mariana's air defenses consisted of approximately 500 Japanese aircraft. Only half were operational due to maintenance problems, fuel shortages, and spare parts limitations. At 13:35 hours, Brewer's Hellcats encountered the first Japanese defenders. 30 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters rose to intercept the American formation. The engagement would demonstrate the evolution of Pacific air combat. The Zero had been revolutionary in 1940. By 1944, it was catastrophically obsolete. Maximum speed of 331 miles per hour could not match the Hellcat's performance. Climb rate to 20,000 feet required 9.5 minutes. The aircraft lacked armor protection for pilots. Self-sealing fuel tanks were never installed. Most critically, Japanese pilots averaged less than 200 hours of flight time. Many possessed fewer than 100 hours of experience in operational aircraft. The first day's combat over the Marianas destroyed 147 Japanese aircraft. American losses totaled 11 planes. Most American pilots were recovered by rescue operations. The kill ratio exceeded 13-1 in what Commander David McCampbell of Air Group 15 would later describe as similar to clubbing baby seals. Japanese pilots flew predictable patterns that American veterans exploited ruthlessly. Formation integrity collapsed under pressure. Gunnery skills proved inadequate against maneuvering targets. Tactical communications became confused and contradictory. Individual courage could not compensate for inadequate training and obsolete equipment. Japanese naval intelligence monitoring American radio communications from their base at Tawi-Tawi began to comprehend the magnitude of the threat facing the mobile fleet. Emergency messages activated Operation A-Go immediately. Admiral Ozawa received orders to sortie for decisive battle. The plan called for land-based aircraft from Marianas airfields to damage American carriers sufficiently for Ozawa's carrier aircraft to deliver killing blows. On June 13th, cryptanalysts at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific intercepted and decoded Japanese message traffic that revealed Ozawa's intentions completely. The mobile fleet would sortie from Tawi-Tawi, refuel in the Philippine Sea, then attack American invasion forces at Saipan. Intelligence provided Admiral Raymond Spruance with complete tactical warning. Spruance commanded Fifth Fleet from his flagship, heavy cruiser Indianapolis. His decision would determine the nature of the coming battle. Rather than pursue the Japanese fleet aggressively, Task Force 58 would remain tied to invasion beaches. This forced Ozawa to approach American positions, negating Japanese advantages in aircraft range while maximizing American strengths in defensive operations. Executive Officer John Williamson aboard USS Yorktown calculated the tactical geometry with mathematical precision. Japanese carrier aircraft possessed longer operational ranges than their American counterparts. Zero fighters could fly 1,940 miles on internal fuel. Kate and Val bombers had similar endurance capabilities. American Hellcats had combat radii of 340 miles. Helldiver dive bombers managed 276 miles. Avenger torpedo bombers reached 275 miles maximum. These specifications meant Ozawa could launch strikes from beyond American striking range. This represented a critical tactical advantage that Japanese planners believed would prove decisive. What they failed to understand was that modern carrier warfare had evolved beyond individual aircraft performance comparisons. Williamson and other American planners understood that integrated system capabilities determined victory or defeat. Radar-directed fighter control provided defensive coordination impossible for Japanese forces. Proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells created lethal defensive barriers. Advanced damage control procedures enabled ships to survive attacks that would sink older designs. Communications discipline maintained tactical coordination under combat stress. Essex-class carriers possessed overwhelming advantages in every category except pure aircraft range. American industrial capacity could replace losses. Training programs produced pilots faster than combat consumed them. Technological innovation provided equipment superiority that Japanese industry could not match. At 21:30 hours on June 18th, submarine USS Kavala detected the Japanese mobile fleet 360 miles west-southwest of Saipan. Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler maintained contact for 6 hours while transmitting position reports that reached Spruance by Oro 300 on June 19th. The Japanese approached from the west, apparently unaware that their position had been compromised. Dawn broke on June 19, 1944, with weather conditions ideal for carrier operations. Ceiling Unlimited provided perfect visibility. 40-mile visibility allowed long-range detection of approaching aircraft. Moderate easterly trade winds at 14 knots created perfect conditions for flight operations. Sea State 3 with long Pacific swells posed no problems for experienced carrier pilots. Flying weather could not have been better for what would become the largest carrier battle in naval history. At 07:30 hours, radar operators aboard USS Yorktown detected the first Japanese strike wave. 140 miles range showed 69 aircraft approaching from the west at 18,000 feet altitude. Fighter Direction Officer Lieutenant Joseph Eggert began vectoring combat air patrol fighters to intercept positions. The engagement would demonstrate American tactical superiority in devastating fashion. Grumman F-6F-3 Hellcats climbed toward the incoming raid with 650 caliber machine guns carrying 400 rounds per gun. Lieutenant Alex Vrasiu flew from USS Lexington as part of the intercepting force. An ace with 12 previous victories, Vrasiu possessed the experience and skill that Japanese pilot training programs could no longer produce. The interception would become legendary in naval aviation history. Vrasiu later described his incredulity at Japanese tactics. Perfect formation flying suggested an air show rather than combat operations. No weaving maneuvers provided defensive flexibility. No cover flights protected the main formation. Straight and level flight made targeting simple for experienced American pilots. 8 minutes of combat produced results that stunned even veteran American aviators. Vrasiu shot down 6 Japanese aircraft, becoming an ace in a single day. The engagement demonstrated the catastrophic deterioration of Japanese pilot training programs. Skills that had been taken for granted at Pearl Harbor no longer existed among replacement pilots. The Japanese strike leader, Lieutenant Commander Akira Tamai from carrier Taiho, had never encountered radar-directed fighter interception. His pilots, averaging 150 hours flight time, were completely unprepared for coordinated Hellcat attacks. American fighters engaged from above and behind, using superior speed and firepower to devastating effect. Of 69 aircraft in the first wave, 42 were destroyed before reaching the American fleet. At 0910 hours, submarine USS Albacore fired 6 torpedoes at carrier Taiho from 5,000 yards range. one torpedo struck the carrier's aviation fuel system, causing vapor leaks that would prove fatal within hours. Damage Control Officer Commander Yutaka Kobayashi ordered ventilation systems reversed to clear dangerous fumes. This decision inadvertently spread aviation gasoline vapors throughout the ship, creating conditions for catastrophic explosion. The second Japanese strike wave arrived at 1100 hours with 128 aircraft. Radar-directed Hellcats intercepted at 60 miles from the fleet, preventing most Japanese aircraft from reaching attack positions. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer led VF-15 from Essex in another devastating interception. His post-action report captured American amazement at Japanese tactical ineptitude. Training exercise conditions prevailed throughout the engagement. Japanese aircraft flew directly into American guns without evasive action. Formation discipline collapsed immediately under pressure. Individual aircraft became easy targets for experienced American pilots. Brewer's wingman asked whether they were really in combat or participating in a training demonstration. 97 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in the second wave. American casualties remained minimal. Most pilots were recovered by efficient rescue operations that Japanese forces could not match. American anti-aircraft fire, directed by Mark 37 gun directors with radar ranging capability, created defensive walls around the carriers. Proximity-fused shells detonated within lethal range of aircraft without requiring direct hits. Japanese pilots who survived these encounters reported that American ships appeared surrounded by impenetrable shields of explosions. Traditional dive bombing and torpedo attack techniques proved useless against coordinated defensive systems that combined radar detection, fighter interception, and massed anti-aircraft fire. At 12:20 hours, submarine USS Kavala put 4 torpedoes into veteran carrier Shokaku. Captain Hiroshi Matsubara ordered counter-flooding procedures, but damage proved catastrophic. Shokaku had survived Coral Sea and Eastern Solomons battles, but 9 months of constant operations without proper maintenance had weakened damage control capabilities throughout the ship. Aviation fuel leaked from ruptured tanks, creating fire hazards in multiple compartments. Electrical systems failed, eliminating power for essential equipment. Pumps could not handle flooding from multiple torpedo hits. 3 hours after the attack, Shokaku sank with 1,263 men, including experienced pilots and maintenance personnel who could not be replaced. The third Japanese wave of 47 aircraft launched at 1,000 hours reached the American fleet at 1,300 hours. Only 7 aircraft returned to their carriers. The massacre continued with mechanical precision that horrified Japanese survivors. Fighter pilot Ensign Kiyoshi Muto, one of the few who escaped, testified to the hopelessness of Japanese attacks. American fighters appeared everywhere simultaneously. Above, beside, and behind attacking aircraft, their tactics were perfect. Japanese pilots never had opportunities to engage on equal terms. Coordinated attacks eliminated individual aircraft before they could reach American ships. The technological and training gap had become unbridgeable. Admiral Ozawa, unaware of mounting losses due to poor communications, ordered a 4th strike of 82 aircraft at 11:30 hours. Confused by navigation errors and communication failures, this wave split into 2 groups. One group of 33 aircraft flew north and found nothing. The other 49 aircraft encountered Task Group 58.2 and suffered predictable consequences. American Hellcats destroyed 30 aircraft in 12 minutes of combat. The systematic destruction of Japanese striking power continued without pause. American pilots possessed overwhelming advantages in training, equipment, and tactical coordination that Japanese forces could not counter. At 14:52 hours, a massive explosion destroyed carrier Taiho completely. Aviation fuel vapors that had accumulated throughout the ship reached critical concentration. The detonation broke the carrier's back, sending her to the bottom with 1,650 men. Admiral Ozawa's air staff died in the explosion, eliminating command and control capabilities for remaining mobile fleet operations. Ozawa survived by transferring his flag to cruiser Haguro, but effective coordination of Japanese carrier operations had ceased. Communication systems were inadequate for coordinating complex operations. Staff officers lacked experience in managing multi-carrier strikes. The institutional knowledge required for carrier warfare had been destroyed, along with Taiho. By sunset on June 19th, Japanese forces had launched 373 carrier aircraft in 4 separate strikes. Only 130 aircraft returned to their carriers. Many of these were damaged beyond repair or flown by wounded pilots. American losses totaled 29 aircraft in air-to-air combat, with most pilots recovered by rescue operations. The kill ratio exceeded 10-1, representing the most lopsided air combat result of the entire Pacific War. American pilots, averaging 300 to 500 hours of flight time, had systematically destroyed opponents who possessed neither adequate training nor suitable equipment for modern carrier warfare. At 1540 hours on June 20th, search aircraft from USS Enterprise located the retreating Japanese fleet 275 miles west-northwest of Task Force 58. The range was extreme, beyond normal combat radius for American aircraft. Recovery operations would occur after dark, something carrier aviation doctrine strongly discouraged due to accident risks. Mitchell understood this might represent the only opportunity to complete destruction of Japanese carrier aviation. The decision required balancing tactical opportunity against operational risk. At 1621 hours, Mitchell gave the order that would become legendary in naval aviation history. Launch everything available immediately. 240 aircraft launched in 10 minutes from 11 carriers. 85 Hellcats provided fighter escort. 77 dive bombers carried armor-piercing bombs. 54 torpedo bombers armed with Mark 13 torpedoes completed the strike force. Fuel calculations were critical for every pilot. Each aircraft carried exactly enough fuel for the strike and return flight with no margin for error. Lieutenant Commander James "Jig Dog" Ramage led Bombing Squadron 10 from Enterprise. His briefing to pilots was characteristically direct. This represented a one-way mission unless fuel consumption was managed perfectly. Lean mixture settings and optimal cruise configurations were mandatory. No unnecessary maneuvering could be tolerated. Single passes at targets, then straight-line flights home. The American strike found the Japanese fleet at sunset in rapidly fading light. Carrier Hio took multiple torpedo hits from Avengers of Below Wood. The converted passenger liner possessed inadequate subdivision for military operations. She sank within 2 hours with 250 men. Carriers Zuikaku and Chiyoda suffered damage but remained operational. Battleship Haruna also took hits, but survived. The return flight became an epic of navigation and endurance that tested American training programs to their limits. Darkness fell while aircraft were still hours from their carriers. Pilots began running out of fuel as engines quit from empty tanks. Emergency procedures called for ditching beside destroyers when possible. Others reached task force vicinity, but couldn't locate their carriers in complete darkness. At 20:45 hours, Mitchell made the decision that would become legendary throughout naval aviation. Turn on every light available immediately. Every ship in Task Force 58 illuminated completely. Searchlights pointed vertically into the night sky. Running lights blazed from every vessel. Flight deck lights outlined landing areas. Star shells burst overhead, creating artificial daylight. For 2 hours, the fleet recovered aircraft in conditions that violated every peacetime safety regulation. Many aircraft landed on any available deck rather than searching for their assigned carriers. Cross-deck procedures enabled pilots to land wherever space existed. 76 aircraft were lost during the mission, but most pilots were rescued by efficient search and rescue operations. The strike had cost American carrier aviation heavily in aircraft losses, but Japanese carrier power was finished as an offensive force. Remaining Japanese pilots lacked both skill and experience to conduct effective operations against American defenses. By dawn on June 21st, the scale of Japanese catastrophe was becoming clear to both sides. 2 days of combat had cost the Imperial Japanese Navy 3 fleet carriers. Taiho, Shokaku, and Hiyo rested on the Pacific floor. More critically, between 476 and 600 aircraft had been destroyed, including both carrier and land-based planes. Approximately 445 trained aircrew were dead or missing. Survivors flying back to Ozawa's remaining carriers possessed neither skill nor experience necessary for offensive carrier operations. Many had never participated in coordinated strikes. Others lacked training in night operations or instrument flying. The institutional knowledge required for complex carrier warfare had been destroyed along with the aircraft and pilots. American losses totaled 123 aircraft, with 76 aircrew killed or missing. More importantly, Task Force 58 retained over 750 operational aircraft with experienced pilots. Replacement aircraft and pilots were already en route from training commands in the United States. The industrial mathematics were inexorable and devastating to Japanese hopes. American training programs produced 2,000 new naval aviators monthly. Each pilot received 500 hours of flight training, including 50 hours in operational aircraft types. Advanced training included radar interception procedures, night operations, and instrument flying techniques. Combat veterans rotated to training commands as instructors, ensuring tactical lessons were immediately incorporated into curricula. Japanese pilot training had collapsed to 150 hours total flight time. Many replacement pilots received as little as 50 hours in operational aircraft types. Fuel shortages limited training flights to absolute minimums. Experienced instructors had been recalled to combat units to replace losses. Accelerated programs produced pilots who could barely take off and land safely, let alone engage in combat maneuvering against experienced opponents. Commander David McCampbell, who would become the Navy's leading ace with 34 victories, analyzed tactical implications with brutal honesty. By June 1944, American forces were not fighting the Japanese Navy that had attacked Pearl Harbor. Those pilots were dead, killed in 3 years of attrition warfare. Current opponents were undertrained replacements who could barely fly their aircraft. Essex carriers and their air groups represented weapons designed specifically for industrial warfare. Japan could not compete with American production capacity, training programs, or technological innovation. The battle had demonstrated the futility of individual courage against systematic preparation and overwhelming material superiority. Statistical analysis revealed devastating efficiency of American carrier operations in every measurable category. Each Essex-class carrier could launch full strikes of 40 aircraft in 12 minutes. Recovery operations required 18 minutes under normal conditions. Rearming and refueling procedures took 45 minutes with experienced deck crews. Theoretically, each carrier could generate 3 full strikes in 4 hours of continuous operations. With 15 carriers operating in coordination, Task Force 58 could deliver 600 aircraft over targets simultaneously. No opponent could survive such concentrated attacks with existing defensive capabilities. The Battle of the Philippine Sea shattered Japanese naval aviation beyond any possibility of recovery. Admiral Toyoda's subsequent assessment was characteristically blunt in its honesty. The first mobile fleet had been rendered ineffective as an offensive force. Carrier pilot strength was exhausted beyond replacement capabilities. Alternative tactics must be adopted immediately. Those alternative tactics would manifest 4 months later as organized kamikaze attacks, the desperate resort of a navy that could no longer train conventional pilots or replace conventional aircraft losses. Suicide attacks represented acknowledgement that Japanese naval aviation could not compete with American capabilities in traditional combat operations. Vice Admiral Ozawa, rescued from the water after Taiho's sinking, submitted his final report on June 24th. Enemy radar-controlled interception had achieved perfect effectiveness. American pilots displayed overwhelming superiority in every aspect of air combat operations. Japanese attacks had been defeated before reaching effective range of American ships. The mobile fleet's air groups had ceased to exist as combat forces. Remaining aircraft and pilots were inadequate for offensive operations against American defenses. The report marked the end of Japanese carrier aviation as a strategic weapon in the Pacific War. Essex-class carriers had validated American approaches to naval warfare through industrial mass production and systematic training. Each ship incorporated lessons learned from previous combat operations. Improved ventilation systems prevented accumulation of explosive vapors. Enhanced damage control training meant that severely damaged ships like USS Franklin and USS Bunker Hill would survive attacks that would have sunk earlier designs. Production statistics revealed the complete futility of continued Japanese resistance. By June 1944, American shipyards had commissioned 7 Essex-class carriers, with 17 more under construction. Newport News Shipbuilding Company alone was launching 1 carrier every 6 months. Total construction time had been reduced to 14 months through standardized components and assembly line techniques. The technological gap proved equally decisive in determining battle outcomes. American radar systems provided 100-mile detection ranges with height-finding capabilities. Mark 37 gun directors with Mark 12 radar could track aircraft at 40,000-yard ranges. VT proximity fuses increased anti-aircraft lethality by 300% over conventional ammunition. Combat information centers coordinated defensive efforts with unprecedented efficiency. Japanese technology remained frozen at 1941 levels throughout the war. Zero fighters that had been revolutionary at war's beginning received only minor improvements. Radar systems remained primitive and unreliable when they functioned at all. Communications equipment was obsolete by American standards. Most critically, Japan lacked industrial capacity to incorporate combat lessons into new aircraft designs. Training programs revealed strategic divergence between combatants that had become unbridgeable. The U.S. Navy Training Command operated 14 air stations with 10,000 training aircraft. Monthly pilot production exceeded combat losses by factors of 3. Each pilot progressed through primary, basic, advanced, and operational training phases lasting months. Combat veterans rotated to training commands as instructors, ensuring tactical lessons were immediately incorporated into training curricula. Advanced combat training included formation flying, gunnery practice, navigation, and night operations. Graduates possessed skills necessary for complex carrier operations under combat conditions. Japanese training had collapsed into abbreviated programs producing marginally qualified pilots. The Yokaran program that had produced elite naval aviators before 1942 was reduced to teaching basic flying skills only. Advanced combat training was eliminated due to fuel shortages and aircraft limitations. Formation flying, gunnery practice, and navigation training were minimal or non-existent. The human cost was staggering beyond statistical measurement. Of 450 Japanese aircrew lost in the Philippine Sea battle, most were irreplaceable veterans with over 1 year of combat experience. Their deaths meant institutional knowledge of carrier operations died with them. Survivors lacked experience necessary to train replacements or develop new tactical doctrines. American personnel policies ensured continuity of experience through systematic rotation procedures. Combat tours were limited to preserve veteran pilots for training duties. Rotation policies meant every squadron contained mixtures of veterans and newcomers. Experienced pilots were assigned to training commands after completing operational tours. This systematic approach to human resource management proved as decisive as technological superiority in determining war outcomes. Experience was preserved and transmitted rather than consumed in continuous combat operations. By October 1944, when the Imperial Japanese Navy made its final gambit at Leyte Gulf, the carrier force that had stunned the world at Pearl Harbor no longer existed in any meaningful sense. 4 carriers sailed with Admiral Ozawa as a sacrificial decoy force. They carried only 108 aircraft with half-trained pilots who possessed minimal combat experience. The engagement off Cape Engano was less a battle than systematic execution. American carrier aircraft sank all 4 Japanese carriers while losing only 10 aircraft. The kill ratios demonstrated complete American superiority in every aspect of carrier warfare. Japanese resistance had become token rather than effective. Essex-class carriers continued operations throughout the remaining Pacific War, but their greatest victory had already been achieved. In 2 days over the Philippine Sea, they had accomplished what 3 years of grinding attrition had failed to achieve: complete destruction of Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force had been accomplished through superior training, technology, and industrial capacity. Admiral Chester Nimitz's assessment was characteristically understated in its evaluation of American achievements. Essex-class carriers and their air groups represented American industrial democracy at war. Mass production capabilities, technological innovation, and systematic training programs had created weapon systems that Japanese forces could neither match nor effectively counter. The Battle of the Philippine Sea represented more than tactical victory. It validated American approaches to modern warfare through industrial methods applied to military problems. Superior training programs, advanced technology, and overwhelming production capacity had proven decisive against traditional military virtues of individual courage and tactical skill. The legacy extended far beyond World War II. Sea operations. 24 Essex-class carriers were completed and commissioned, serving through Korean and Vietnam conflicts into the 1970s. USS Lexington, survivor of the Philippine Sea battle, remained in commission until 1991. Her longevity testified to robust designs that had revolutionized naval warfare permanently. Deep beneath Pacific waters, 3 Japanese carriers rest on the seabed with their aircraft still in hangars and pilots at their stations. They stand as monuments to the last historical moment when individual skill and personal courage might have overcome industrial mass production and systematic preparation. Mathematics, as Executive Officer Williamson had understood, proved inexorable in determining victory. Essex-class carriers had not merely won a single battle. They had demonstrated that future naval warfare belonged to nations capable of mobilizing industrial democracy, technological innovation, and systematic training programs on massive scales. The Philippine Sea marked the definitive end of an era when naval aviation remained an art practiced by elite warriors with specialized skills. The future belonged to nations that could transform warfare into industrial processes where victory was determined by production statistics, training hours, and technological specifications rather than individual heroism. Essex-class carriers, products of American shipyards, and crewed by citizen sailors, had forever changed the fundamental nature of naval warfare. Industrial capacity rather than traditional military virtues would determine outcomes of future conflicts involving modern weapon systems operated by systematically trained personnel.